Hi everyone, thank you for joining us at LogiKal to discuss the 3 critical success factors in the delivery of major programs. I want to start by telling you a little bit about LogiKal and why we do what we do. At LogiKal, we believe that projects can be delivered better, and that project controls plays a pivotal role as the integrator that drives project efficiency and effectiveness. My name is Jay Armstrong and I am a principal consultant at LogiKal. I have over 15 years experience in major project delivery, and I've worked in a number of industries including rail, water, mining, oil and gas, as well as civil infrastructure. And I've been lucky enough to do this in a number of places including the UK, Australia and Canada. So today I'd like to have a talk to you about and explore why projects are failing. We'll explore the concept of project complexity, and then I'd like to look at the actual 3 critical success factors that drive the delivery of major programs before wrapping up the presentation. So why are projects failing? Every year at LogiKal we undertake an industry survey which looks at and explores a number of elements within the project controls industry. This year, in 2018, what was very interesting is that we noticed that the percentage of projects that are reported as achieving most or all cost, time and scope objectives is actually quite low. In nearly everywhere around the world, it's under 50%. And when we look at Europe specifically, we found it was actually lower again, in the order of 37%. So roughly 1 in 3 of the projects that we undertake are actually achieving most or all cost, time and scope objectives. Further to this, a National Audit Office report showed that projects have a history of unrealistic expectations and over-optimism built into them, and that some 35% of projects are due to be completed in the next 5 years are considered unachievable or in doubt by government bodies that oversee them. What's interesting is that when we dig a little further with that, we can see that in one influential study which was undertaken by Blent Flyvberg, he's an expert in project management from Oxford's Business School, he actually estimated that 9 out of 10 mega projects actually go over budget. So again, helping to reinforce the statistics with project delivery. So why are projects failing? I'd like to answer this with a quote. I think the enormity and complexity of Crossrail in all manners, the stations, the trains, the signalling systems, the software integration, the control systems, the interface with Network Rail, the truth is that the complexity was not fully understood. This is actually a quote from Mark Wilde, who's the Crossrail Chief Executive, and it was taken from the New Civil Engineer in February of 2019. For those of you who don't know, Crossrail was due to open at the end of last year, but at this stage has been delayed and the program's still being reviewed, and it looks like it'll be at least a year late with 1 to 2 billion of cost overruns based on a KPMG estimate. In addition to the cost and schedule overruns, there's also been a huge fallout in terms of reputation and political damage, particularly to Tier 1 contractors, TfL, the Network Rail, and some of you have probably read a number of the headlines with regards to the Mayor of London's office. And it's actually continuing. So, in light of this, what is major project complexity and what makes a project complex? Well, major projects are inherently complex by definition. They're often multidisciplinary, there's numerous stakeholders involved, so we'll often have JVs, government bodies, subcontractors. They're often brownfield construction, so you have interfaces with existing works or existing operational sites. There's numerous interfaces, the complex logistics that are involved in their delivery, and more recently technological advances and the sheer increasing number of requirements that actually have to be managed when we deliver these huge scopes of work. So taking this and applying it to a couple of practical examples, HS2, for those of you who, some of you may be familiar with this project, but HS2 is actually Europe's largest infrastructure project. And it's the new railway that will be the backbone of Britain's transport network. It consists of 345 miles of new high-speed track, and it's intended to connect the city centres of London, Birmingham, Manchester and Leeds. At capacity it will service approximately 300,000 passengers a day, or about 100 million a year when it's fully operational. So in this particular instance, the complexity is just the sheer size of the project. You're dealing with 345 miles of project. It's a multidiscipline project. It's also interesting in that it has not only traditional construction disciplines, but also a number of more bespoke rail disciplines as well, in addition to pre-construction elements such as consents, approvals, land acquisition, design and procurement. Now, this carries with it a huge high, level of integration risk because of all those different interfaces that need to be managed. To put this in perspective as well, with Crossrail, Crossrail was in the order of about 15 billion, whereas HS2 is actually in the order of 56 billion, and the first phase of the job is in the order of 27 billion. So we're looking at a project that's already double the size of Crossrail, which is something we're undertaking currently, and yet you've got levels of complexity to manage again. A little bit closer to home for me personally is the Thames Tideway Tunnel. I've been personally involved in this project for the last 3.5 odd years in their project controls office, setting up their project control systems and management solutions. And in this particular instance, one of the major challenges we have and what makes this project complex is that you're delivering major construction works in an existing city, in this particular case, London. And so it's increasingly more brownfield, pardon the pun, than greenfield in nature. There's a lot of interfaces with existing infrastructure. So the section I'm working on is 7 kilometres of the 25 kilometre total length. Then even that consists of some 9 odd work sites, hundreds of work packages, hundreds of procurement packages that need to be overseen. We have over 1,000 consents, multiple consenting bodies that have to be managed, and some thousands of assets that need to be protected and overseen as well. In addition to this, it's the volume of data that needs to be managed. Each of these elements carries with it its own sets of information and data that needs to be overseen. You're also dealing with a lot of embedded cultures and processes, and some of the site logistics. We're operating on very tight sites. We're running through the centre of the city, and the actual route of the tunnel runs pretty much directly under the Thames for the majority of its route. On another front, we have the Hinkley Point C project, so something from a completely different industry. This one's quite interesting because it is a nuclear project. LogiKal have been personally involved in this as well. So Hinkley, for those of you who don't know, consists of 2 new nuclear reactors at Hinkley Point C in Somerset. And its objective is to supply electricity for some 6 million odd homes around the UK. It'll also intended to provide low carbon electricity but the catch with this is it is nuclear. This can be controversial. It's politically and environmentally sensitive. People will have different views on this type of project. The other thing that's quite interesting here is the location. So the resources themselves, can you get the right people in the right roles, and what cost is associated with that, and is it actually manageable? Nuclear is also quite unique as well in terms of the tolerances and quality requirements that are needed during the delivery. They're particularly high, much higher than the average construction or infrastructure project. And again, you're dealing with site logistics that are very compressed. You can see from the photos that there's a huge amount of work that needs to be undertaken in numerous disciplines in very, very small spaces. So this creates complexities with interfacing again. And also nuclear is a very advanced technology. So there's a high level of system integration and commissioning risk that comes with the delivery of this type of project. So how does complexity impact construction? Well, my view is complexity compounds the likelihood and impact of risk. Quite often there's increased interfaces, often not appreciated, and consequently the scope and integration requirements are not well understood. You have lots of interfaces driving factors on critical works. There's, as a result, greater chance of risk occurring that may impact these works. So what we see is that the likelihood of change over the life cycle of the project increases. You get an increased program risk, and coupled with that, increased commercial and cost risk as a consequence. Interestingly too, what you tend to find is that as soon as a project does run into any of these challenges, that the first thing we tend to do is value engineer a project, and so the benefits may be watered down or impacted over time, particularly with longer programs of works. So what was initially set out to be delivered may change, or the end result may not be what we'd originally hoped to see. Referring back to Crossrail as well, with the issues that project's undertaken, very quickly too there was a talk about delaying future investments, which means that you have the knock-on impact to the broader economy because you can't deliver other elements of work that the industry would like to see. So, having explored complexity a little bit, I'd like to have a look now at the 3 critical success factors that actually drive program delivery. specifically organisational complexity, risk transfer and incentivisation, and performance management. So the first of these, organisational complexity. What do I mean by that? Well, the way we deliver projects and programs actually creates complexity. We often have capital programs with various delivery mechanisms set up. So you can have a host of different options. I won't go through all of them here, but you end up with licensing models, SPVs, program delivery partners, public-private partnerships. You may have traditional EPC delivery models or design and build contracts. You'll often have joint ventures in place. And more recently too, we're starting to see things like the Project 13 integration style models coming into play. Now, what's interesting about this is that many traditional contract delivery models actually encourage a confrontational client versus contractor approach. And as a consequence, they often discourage integrated teams despite the best intentions of the parties involved. So whilst the behaviours might be that we want to be one big happy family, the contract structure or the organisational structure put in place to oversee the works often runs contrary to that system. Another element you'll find is that the roles and responsibilities are often unclear, particularly in more complex organisations. So this can lead to a lot of confusion and confrontation. For example, if you have a JV with multiple parties involved, everyone can assume different people are doing different things, and it may not be clear who ultimately owns it or has the responsibility for it. Similarly, you may find that in a JV you have multiple procedures and systems because there's various organisations involved, but there's no one clear overriding one which drives behaviours commonly through the project. The other element as a consequence is the potential for duplication of effort and a number of inefficiencies that can come with that as well. And you may find that there's misalignment between the collaboration intent and the conditions of contract. We may want one behaviour, but the contract may actually be set up in such a way that we don't encourage it. I.e. the desired project values, e.g. collaboration, we need to make sure that's actually aligned with the contractual requirements that we put in place to avoid conflict. The values that we want and the behaviours we want need to be supported by the mechanisms for project delivery. So the first of these elements that drive project success is to select the right organisational model. We need to ensure that we have the right enterprise partners in place. We need to ensure that roles and responsibilities are clearly understood, clearly communicated, and sent around the project, and they're understood. You need to have a good look too at the focus on the behaviours and the business culture. Does the organisational model you're going to put in place support the behaviours that you actually want to see? What's interesting about this is that when you look at things in terms of an OH&S perspective, if you have a set of values in place but the behaviours and actions that the contract drives are contrary to that, you're actually going to create friction and purely from a mental health point of view, therefore anxiety and stress from the outset, setting yourself up to be in a very negative position. It's also really important when we do put the organisational model in place that by having the right one straight away, you're reducing your commercial and contractual risk and therefore increasing the likelihood of success from the outset. The second point I wanted to look into was risk transfer and incentivisation. So when we look at risk transfer and incentivisation, there's a number of contract forms that can be taken, and quite often there's an expectation of risk transfer and that we should transfer risk down the supply chain. However, we need to recognise as an industry that actually a number of traditional risk mitigation techniques actually increase complexity. So when we look at this, what we need in these strategies, we need to properly assess risk avoidance strategies that transfer risk down the supply chain and ask ourselves, are we just delaying or avoiding the issue by making it someone else's problem? Is it really a best for project approach? And are the delivery and contract structures aligned with the desired behaviours? Again, if we look at something like Crossrail, where we see that there was a transfer of risk down the supply chain with a view that this would become a contractor's risk, ultimately when that risk was realised and the delivery risk came manifest, no one really won out of that situation. Ultimately, the client ended up actually owning that risk, even though they thought they transferred it down the supply chain. So how do we manage that from a project delivery perspective? We need to ensure we've got proper incentivisation in place and that we use the contract as a tool, not a weapon. We need to change the embedded industry culture. So when I talk about using the contract as a tool and not a weapon, we need to make sure that there's actually adequate share and provision in the final project finalisation and benefits to encourage collaboration using the contract itself. If everyone is incentivised, you encourage the behaviours and a best for project approach, and this will help reduce your contract risk exposure and hopefully to better manage the behaviours on the project itself. In terms of changing the embedded industry culture, we need to recognise too that the business and delivery models often in place on more traditional construction or based on more traditional construction risks. This means they're typically very highly competitive. They often operate in very low margins, typically in the order of 2 to 5%. There's often a view to get your foot in the door, if you like, by bidding low to win the work and then use change to deliver margins. However, this behaviour, increasingly as projects get more complex, actually ignores the inherited contract risk because it assumes that you will be able to win back your additional costs through change management. But the project structures may be such, or the contract structures may be such that you can't actually do that because you've inherited and priced, in theory, the risk that comes with it. The third element I wanted to have a look at was performance management. So performance management, what we find with performance management is, what's very interesting is an industry, productivity is not improving in the construction industry. It's well known that the construction industry has perhaps not performed as well as other sectors. For argument's sake, the manufacturing sector has roughly doubled its productivity over the last 2 decades, whereas construction productivity has remained relatively flat or in some cases even declined. And when we look at that, so what are we actually doing? We have a tendency to measure the hell out of everything and to try and capture more and more information. It's human nature when we don't understand something to want more information. However, as a consequence, we have data and data and data, and we've increased the volume of information that we're capturing. But to the point where we have cognitive overload. By that, what I mean is that we can't see the forest for the trees. We're completely smothered in information to the point where we don't actually know where to look and what we're interested in. So, on that purpose, when we talk performance management, it's critical that we integrate data with a purpose. It's fantastic that we're capturing information, and new systems and technologies allow us to gather so much information, and it forms the foundation for intelligence and ultimately wisdom. But we need to understand that unless we're using that data and integrating it with a purpose, we are doing ourselves a disfavour and perhaps not utilising the full benefits we can get out of it. On that note, we also need to recognise that the construction companies and the clients and the contractors involved need to actually join the digital future. Ideally, we need to encourage or incentivise construction companies to adapt and to shift away from a project-specific, short-term view of the world and incentivise them to invest longer term in some of the technologies and systems that will allow them to make better use of their information and data. There's also a huge opportunity here to learn from other industries and leverage what other industries are doing and learning and how they've applied the newer tools and technologies. So when we integrate data with a purpose, we find that we can use timely, reliable and transparent data that can increase trust and empower your decision making. More importantly, what we find as well is it can help shift your strategy, your managerial strategy within the organisation or the project space from a very reactive, ad hoc firefighting approach to a much more proactive, future-looking, forward-looking approach. There's opportunity to influence things earlier because you have information that tells you where the issues are and highlights where you need to focus your efforts. I'm a big believer in using data to work smarter, not harder. What's interesting is that in so many cases we capture all this information and we have it all at our fingertips. Let's use it to actually make our life easier and actually capitalise on its benefit. Also, what's really exciting about the newer tools that exist and some of the business intelligence tools that are now out there and the power of cloud computing and those sorts of things is they help us simplify the accessibility of information. So anyone on the project can access information and find elements that suit them. And it's very easy to tailor your information to suit the audience that it's needed for. So in summary, and a quick wrap up of what we've had a look at. What we've had a look at here is the 3 critical success factors in major program delivery. And the first of those we said was selecting the right organisational model and ensuring from the outset you're in a position, you're setting yourself up for success to facilitate the actual delivery of the project in the first place. Secondly, make sure that the contract model that's in place actually has proper incentivisation and that the risk transfer models adapted are recognised, and that we recognise when we've transferred the risk and ensure that the appropriate mitigations are in place to keep an eye on it and not just assume that that'll be solved down the track. And thirdly, with regards to performance management and data, make sure you're integrating your data with a purpose and actually using it to analyse where the project's going and what's going to happen. With all of these things, you're not always in a position to influence the project model that's adapted, but understanding how it works, defining the roles and responsibilities, and really looking at the culture and working on the behaviours will ensure that you can set yourself up and maximise your ability in the delivery phase. Really know the contract as a consequence, use the contract, but use it positively. It's a two-way street and it's there to protect both parties in a contract. But be open and collaborative as you go along, and be open to changing the contract. Sometimes what's set up or the intention of the contract that's set up may need to evolve with the project as it goes along. And finally, as I said, establish good performance management processes. Understand what's important to measure and why. Understand what information is really going to help your project drive along. Don't just collect information for the sake of it. Don't see it as a tick box exercise. Actually understand how the information can be used to facilitate the communication and provide a consistent message across the project. And then on top of that, integrate your systems to maximise their efficiency. You don't need to be manually transferring information between systems and structures these days. There's tools out there that will allow us to do that automatically, which frees up resources to then actually analyse and use the information that various systems are generating. This brings us to the end of today's discussion. I will be open to discussing any queries or questions that you might have. If you want to send them through, feel free to discuss them with us. And we look forward to speaking to you again in the near future.